After e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Rossolimo is on the board, and we're looking at the variation with d6. Now, as mentioned in the previous videos of this saga, the move to continue is capture the knight immediately. Pawn takes back, and now e5. So in the first two episodes, in the fourth one we went through d5 and quite a few things that happened next. We also, in the third episode, we went through pawn takes and that weird variation, which is actually pretty annoying to meet. So if you're watching this video for the first time, make sure you go and watch the other Rossolimo d6 games videos that I've made. You'll find them in the playlist in my channel. So after e5 by white, black goes on with d5. It's one of the main moves. White goes on with d3. We're going to look at three options mainly just to see how the setup goes. Bishop g4, bishop f5 and a5. a5 with the ideas of bishop a6. Anyway, after bishop g4, as mentioned in the previous videos, we play knight to d2. The idea is to be able to recapture the knight with the knight in case bishop takes. And now two main options. Let's see g6 for example. So here you attack the bishop immediately. Of course the bishop doesn't have the retreat because bishop h5 means g4 wins a piece. So after bishop takes, knight takes back and bishop g7. This is not good for black actually because the dark square bishop should try to find a way to stay on this diagonal rather than on the fianchetto one. Anyway, after castle and e6, it looks like a completely normal game. White goes on with c3 and we have more space in the center. So after the development of the knight e7, but either way even knight h6, the idea is always to go to f5 with the knight. White goes on with queen a4 targeting the weakness in c6. We can't take that pawn, but we're stopping the black player from being able to move the knight. Otherwise, yes, we'll take the pawn. A move that happens a lot here is thematic queen b6, but now simply queen a3. And the idea obviously is to win the pawn in c5 with bishop to e3, nothing stopping us from winning the pawn. So for example, castle, bishop to e3. We're winning the pawn in c5. This cannot be met with pawn down because we have too many attackers. You can just take the pawn. You're up a crucial pawn in the center. In this position, if instead of castling, black plays c4 to try and challenge this very strong center that we have, here we take. And this is something you're going to see a lot in here. The d pawn often takes in c4 because this will still create a c6 isolated pawn. After pawn takes back, bishop e3, attacking the queen. Obviously pushing the pawn doesn't make sense, you can take it. So after queen b7, keeping pressure on b2, which was the whole point of queen b6. Bishop to c5 comes now, putting double attack on the knight. That means that black cannot castle. If black castles, there's going to be two pieces attacking the knight, only one defending. So let's look at this move, knight to d5. It looks like very natural, although it still doesn't allow the black player to castle short side, and castling long side is a really stupid thing to do, as you can see. Rook f d1 is the move now. White position has already been so much better for a while. After bishop to f8, and now you start to realize why the fianchetto is not the ideal position for the dark square bishop, because we are giving our light square bishop for the knight at the very beginning of the game to create this backwards light pawn, and our dark square bishop will always be moving around this diagonal. That means we're going to challenge the control of the dark square over here. And if you bring the bishop to the fianchetto, you're allowing us a lot of power. And our bishop will have a lot of power from which a lot of responsibility will be derived. So anyway, here bishop takes, a bit surprisingly, but then rook takes back, and now knight to d2. So here we're threatening this pawn, and let's say queen to c7 attacking the pawn. Obviously it doesn't work because knight to c4 comes with the defense of that pawn. f5, don't take en passant. I know you're very tempted to prove your opponent and all your friends online that you know what en passant is. But look, if you're following my videos, I suppose your rating should be minimum 1500 all the way up, so you should know what en passant is. Well, anyway, it's when you take the pawn here, right? But yeah, let's not do it. After f5, you just take the pawn quietly, and you're aiming at controlling the square d6, where the knight will be glorified for centuries to come. And in this position, if black tries queen to e7, desperate for swap, queen to a6, targeting this pawn, black's move would be knight to b6, but we can still win the pawn. There's nothing else to be done. Our rook is super strong, our knight is jumping here. Black might think of trading. That will leave the c6 pawn unguarded. Queen c6 will be checkmate. Next move. And in this position, after queen to a4, targeting the pawn, earlier we went through queen to b6. What happens if black just castles? Simply you go on the plan, bishop to e3, putting more attack over the pawn in c5. And funny thing is, this cannot really be defended. because there's so much attack on d4, meaning that black can't push the pawn without it being taken for free. And pushing c4, you also have two attackers over c4, so you're going to win a pawn no matter what. Rook to b8 with a counter-attack on the pawn is met with bishop takes, ignoring the pawn, because after rook b2, you can play rook to b1, and you're going to control the file. Rook is coming to b2 and it's going to go to b7. It's going to be game over very soon. This cannot be defended, obviously, with the queen, something like queen to b8, and the other rook cannot go and double up with this rook because you will lose track of this knight. This knight will be unguarded, so you'll be able to take the rook and then the knight. So from the start, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, d6. Okay, take the knight, pawn takes, e5. And after d5, d3. Let's look one more time at bishop g4. We protected with the knight. Earlier we went to g6. This time we're going to go through more natural e6. This is met exactly the same way, h3, attacking the bishop immediately. In the previous video we did cover exactly this opening, but always with bishop to h5 and everything that happens next, like queen e2, castle and so on. In this video we're going to go through bishop takes knight. Okay, we take back with the knight. How do we go about from here? Okay, two moves we're going to look. One of them is bishop's development, very quietly to e7. White goes on with c4. If we get taken, we can take back. We have a very safe pawn structure. Yes, we might lose the right to castle, but black will have a permanent weakness, doubled up and isolated pawn. So let's look at three options now after c4. If queen goes to b6, thematic move. Also because black might want to put the rook on the same file of our queen. Okay, castle. And after best move, h5, so that black can play. We see in this position when black develops bishop to e7, he can't place the knight in there. So the only way to develop the knight is from h6 and then f5. But if he plays knight to h6 now, you might think of taking it and break down this pawn structure as well, and black will have nowhere safe the castle. So after h5, allowing knight h6 with the rook defending the knight, white plays queen to a4, and after knight to h6, finally we take the pawn in d5, and this is thematic. We're pinning the pawn in c6. That means this pawn can't take back. Black will have to take with the e-pawn, and now d4. We have a very good center, unless black wants to take. Well, if black really does that, yes, our pawn in e5 is now weaker than it was before, but simply take back, and now we are finalizing the attack over c6, which is a pinned pawn. This cannot be defended because rook to c8 is met with bishop to e3, deadly move. It's already game over. Nothing to do here to prevent us from making this super strong attack like knight to c6. And now there's like a million threats. This cannot be stopped. Let's say bishop to c5. Looks like a very natural move to play, but simply play rook a to d1. Position has been evaluated as if white was up like a couple of pieces for a while. It's a beautiful position to play. Black has a lot of weaknesses. If black castles, for example, know what to do. Well, take the knight. Pawn is going to take back, but it's a disaster of a pawn structure for black to keep playing. If black plays knight to f5 to put more attack over this knight and maybe over this strong bishop, simply take. You're up a piece. It's a free piece because bishop takes. You can just take back. It doesn't even break the pawn structure or anything. You could also play knight to d6. You've got plenty of options. You got a rook, so of course that's just a blunder. And last but not least, let's look at this idea. Queen to b2, winning the pawn. Well, okay, now this comes with knight c6 and the discover check. Very, very strong threats. Best move by black would be queen a3, meaning that if we make a discover check, then the queen can just take our queen for free. Simply play queen to b5. What a beautiful move. What a beautiful, beautiful move. Because you're keeping the pain, it's simply just moving away for a bit. And now the queen can't really propose the same swap, like queen b4 is not possible because of the knight. a6 attacking the queen, and now even better, queen to b7. Look how painful this is for black. Attacking the rook and placing the queen on the throne where she belongs. So in this position, straight after playing c4, we went through queen b6. Let's look at the other two options. g5 is a very popular option in this position. Black just gives up on castling because it's just not going to happen. White goes on with queen to a4. So g5, black is ready to just push the pawns on the king side. And after rook to c8, defending the pawn, white takes this pawn. So that's how you meet this move. Rook to c8, instead of the queen moving, then you just take the pawn in a7. It's not a poisoned pawn. And after h5, this might be one of those situations where maybe lower rated players will start overthinking, but there's just nothing happening. White plays queen to b7. The idea is that now we can start pushing our pawns, and this is a passed pawn. So after knight to h6, You know, g4 couldn't really happen because you could just take it for free. The pawn cannot take back because the rook will take the rook. So after knight h6, we can take this pawn. A bit surprisingly, no, not surprisingly, queen b7 came for that reason. The idea is that now we're attacking the rook, so that means bishop and queen are not really attacking this knight together. Only the bishop is attacking it, because if the queen goes away, then the rook is under attack. And the rook can never attack us because we will take this pawn with check. It's game over. So after bishop takes and bishop takes back, two options. Queen to d7 is one of them, looking for a swap, but now simply queen to b6. And we keep this tremendous position. We're completely winning. a4, a5, a6 is low, but too strong. Knight to f5 by black. The idea is to be able to move the rook maybe to g8. Also the knight can go to some good looking squares. White plays bishop to f6. And after rook to g8, white simply castles. White will win the game because of the a pawn that is going to go up. Black has got absolutely nothing. This knight cannot really do anything that makes sense. h4, g3, none of these squares are accessible. d4 isn't really doing anything. Maybe knight e2, but then you just move away. The center is completely closed. There's no way to attack in any way. And in this position, earlier we went through, after bishop g5, we went to queen d7. What happens after rook takes? Just so we make it clear that there's no escape for black in this variation. Queen c6 check, and after queen blocks, queen takes pawn. Position is falling apart. Rook taking in b2 is not a problem. White simply castles and wins because of the extra material and superior position as well. In this position, earlier we went through queen b6 and g5. One more thing I'm going to show is h5. This is very similar to what we just saw, but I just wanted to show a little bit different idea. Queen a4 comes anyway, so now you're learning how to play against that type of game in this type of Rossolimo. Queen to d7. Let's look at this move now to stop us from to defend the pawn in c6. Okay, bishop to e3 comes, and after knight developing, white plays g4. So the knight was threatening to go to f5, and g4 just stops that from happening. Rook to b8 by black, targeting the pawn, is met with queen to c2. In this case, we couldn't go and take the pawn in a7, neither in c6, so we just went back to c2. It's a good diagonal to be. Let's look at this idea, which we also haven't seen today. f5. Okay, now we take en passant, you see? And we're going to exploit the backward pawn in e6 and this weak square g6. Let's look at the two options here. If black takes with the pawn, for example, long castle, and after king to f7, let's see if the black player will be able to find some safety, also because we're threatening g5. White plays rook d to g1, and now we're threatening to just open the files. Our position is just superior. Let's look at this move, e5. That looks like a very good center for black. White simply plays queen to e2, which is a bit surprising. But how is that? The reason is simple. We want to be able to move this knight and then push the f pawn, and we want to put the queen in a central file. Also, when we move the knight, we're going to have double attack over h5. Black knows we're about to open the files. So after pawn takes and pawn takes back, we have double attack on the knight. This is a really bad game. Black can't move the knight anywhere without losing the rook. So after fade, g5 now just wins for white, as you can see. In this position, if instead of taking with the pawn, black just takes with the bishop, so that you know how to move about here. Well, g5 is a fork. You might have seen it already, but you might have thought, okay, what about bishop takes pawn in b2 with an attack on the rook? You simply play rook to b1 and you're winning a piece. And what about here, rook to b2? Well, simply queen to c1. You're still attacking the knight and the bishop and the rook. The bishop, there's no way the bishop can defend the rook, so black will lose material. The last line we're going to look at before we close this video is going to be the one with knight e7. So after knight c6, bishop b5, d6, we take the knight. Pawn takes back, e5. And after d5, d3, in order to allow space for the knight to go to d2. So bishop g5, knight d2. And after e6, we reach this position, and now we attack the bishop straight away. So we're looking at bishop takes knight. Remember, for more information about bishop h5 variation, you're going to have to look at the previous videos of the same saga. Knight takes back. And earlier we went through bishop e7 and this type of setup. Let's look at knight e7. Okay, we castle. Two options we're going to go through, knight f5 and knight g6. They're both very similar. So knight to g6 The knight puts pressure on e5, potentially might attack it with queen to c7, and also might think of going to h4 and f4. Not now, of course, none of these squares are accessible, but it is a possibility. White goes on with g3, which is important. The reason is simple. Knight h4 could actually be an idea, which I found very annoying. The reason is to remove this knight from f3, so black wants to take and then we take back. But then the endgame is completely normal, everything can happen, and you no longer have the lead. And even if you take, then queen takes back, black is just developing. There's nothing wrong with black's position. So g3 stops everything from happening. So after black develops the piece, bishop to e7. The problem here is that white and black will both be castle short side, but white pawns can go up without problems, without ever worrying, because since the center is closed, you're actually meant to push the side pawns. Not only that, that black just doesn't have any pieces to ever start any attack on the king anytime soon, meaning that it's just completely fine to push these pawns. So h4 comes now. The idea of playing h5 and go to a winning position already. So after black playing h5, rook to e1, continuing development, there's not much to do. Castle, and now knight to h2. And we have an attack on h5. So that's how we're going to be gathering advantage already. After f6, the double attack on the pawn in e5, we take. And after the bishop takes back, we simply go up a pawn. It's a wonderful position to play already. We're attacking the knight. So after queen e8, best moves from now on in such a faulty variation. Like everything is faulty when you play the Rossolimo and when you're well prepared. Queen e2, putting more attack over e6. So after the best move, e5, only move actually, to stop us from winning even more material. Bishop to e3, attacking a pawn. And now d4, c4, remember, could be taken as we've seen in many examples. d4, bishop goes back to d2, we've induced d4, and now the square e4 and c4 will be potential target for outposts for our knight. Let's go on a few moves to see how the endgame should probably look like, but we already have a winning advantage. We've got the extra pawn and our pieces are better placed. Queen to f7, queen to f3, attacking the weakness in c6, as we've been doing plenty of times. And after knight to e7, protecting. b3 is a safe move to play to stop c4 ideas, or even rook b8 ideas. Both ideas are stopped with b3. Let's close the line by just showing a couple of moves. Let's say knight to d5 looks like a nice square from where the knight will have access to some future ideas. Maybe knight b4, not knight e3, not anytime soon, but b4 and c3 maybe. This is met with rook to e4 and the idea of doubling up. And we also put pressure on e5, so black can't just move the bishop away, because first we will swap, and after this, then rook e5, we're completely winning. And in this position, even like something like a5, which is thematic move, the idea is try to create a clash of pawns, swap with our pawn and activate the rook, put the rook on an open file. White plays a4, just stop that from happening. And after knight to b4, the knight is preparing to become a monster in there. Just get rid of it. Knight, bishop takes, pawn takes back. And now the other rook is developed and puts pressure over this pawn. Now we will play knight to g4, finalizing the pressure over e5. Worst case scenario, we might just take in f6 and expose the blocking even more. There's nothing to do here for black, something like c5. And yeah, let's just go on with the plan. Knight g4, that's how you play it. Rook a to e8 doesn't work. You just take the pawn, free extra pawn, don't worry about it. Bishop takes, okay, first swap, rook takes back, and you're winning the endgame. This is getting easier and easier by the second. And even then, in this position, we saw what happens after knight d5, what happens after the immediate a5. How would you take it now? a4. You see, here's the thing when you watch my videos, don't have to memorize any moves. Just when you see something that you feel like you've seen before and you know what's the usual best way to face that threat and the most solid way to face that threat, then you know how to play it. After a5, you know why I explained to you that the pawn wants to go to a4 and be annoying, so just play a4. That's the most useful thing you can get out of my videos. Rook to a7 now, putting the rook on the 7th rank. The idea is to let it arrive somewhere on the central file whilst the rook goes to e8, the other rook goes to e8, and you can double up. Okay, you do the same, rook e2, the idea to double up. And after knight to d5, simply rook a to e1. Just like before, putting pressure on this pawn, you got the idea of knight g4. Remember, the ideas, not the moves. So now rook e7 is already not possible because you will just lose the pawn in a5 and you're growing advantage. If black plays knight to b4 first, you know what to do. Just take. And the fact that the game closes is just fine because black has a dark square bishop and all of these pawns will be on dark squares. So when the pawn takes back, this bishop just becomes like a tall pawn And now knight to g4. Let's say c5. How would you take it from here? Queen to g2 is the best move. The idea is to simply take the pawn in e5. So even like rook to e7, it just doesn't help you. You can just easily take this pawn, and the square f2 is safe. You're winning this crucial pawn, and every other pawn should be easy to clean up. So from the start, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, d6, take the knight, take back, e5, okay, d5, d3, and after the bishop pins you, knight d2, e6, the normal variation, h3. Okay, we're looking at the variation bishop takes, knight takes, and now knight to e7. So as mentioned, we castle, and earlier we went through knight to g6 with the whole g3, h4 idea and so on. What happens after knight to f5? Okay, same thing, g3 is the move. The knight won't have the capacity to go to h4, and he's not really attacking anything from there. After development, bishop e7, bishop to d2. We can't play bishop e3 because then we get taken. It's really ugly with this double pawn. It's not like the end of the world, but we don't want to let that happen because usually you need the f pawn to be alive in this Rossolimo, so you can play f4, f5. It depends on how the game goes. No reason to give our opponent this bishop. So after rook to b8, there's not a single chance that you will remember rook to b8 and move 12 of this video. No matter how many times you might watch this video, if you're a Rossolimo player, the thing is, you're going to remember something. You're going to remember that b3 is just a good move to play in this type of setup against this type of setup. The rook will never infiltrate, the c4 pawn will never push. Okay, so now castle, king to g2 is the best move by white. The game is completely closed. Let's start improving our pieces, and also the rook can come to the h file. A move like f6 now is met with queen to e2. So if black takes, let's say takes, then we can take back with the queen and start applying pressure over the backwards e6 pawn. So that's how it works. So there's no way to trade here. Queen to d6 is met with the beautiful move. Beautiful, even though it's extremely simple. Rook a to e1. You just do nothing. Position is already won here. We threaten to win a pawn, crucial pawn for free. So let's make an example. Let's say queen takes, rook takes. Position is evaluated as if white was up a piece. It's impossible to defend the e6 pawn because even after rook f6, then rook f to e1, we're going to win that pawn. Place the rooks in a fantastic position. King to f7, defending it further doesn't help because of knight g5. And it's not like you can the knight because the knight is defended with the bishop. Now you can just play rook e6. You're completely winning here. In this position, even if black plays bishop to f6, attacking the queen, and tries to overcompensate in development, and also because this is a skewer if you think about it, well, queen e6 comes with check first. So after king to h8, we bring the rook to the e file. After knight to d4, forcing a swap, what can our opponent try to do? Let's say we take back and our bishop takes back. There's a lot of attack over f2. We're still okay. Our king looks a little bit bad, but we're actually okay. Rook to e2 is the best move. And after rook to f6, attacking the queen, defending c6 and coming with development, queen to e7 ends the game. There's no move good enough. White is also threatening bishop g5, also c3 attacking the bishop, winning the pawn in c5, winning the pawn in a7, none of which is poison. After the queen takes, for example, rook takes back, you're completely winning. Rook on the 7 rank, money in the bank. Black plays rook b to f8, best move, tripling the attack over f2. f4, there's nothing here that can happen. Black can't really play g5, looks like maybe this move could do something. You can't really take, you're pinned, you got 2 rooks attacking f1. But this move wins the bishop if you think about it. But you can sort out the rest from here.